Hello, today we are going to be presenting Australia and the Pacific, and we will be covering topics such as the historical and strategic contents of Australia and the Pacific regions, as well as Australia and its hegemon, the future of developing economies in the Pacific Island countries, and lastly, European interest and recommendations according to the two regions.
I'm going to walk you through the historical and strategic context that shapes the Pacific region today. We'll explore three key dimensions: how colonial legacies continue to influence the region, the geopolitical competition reshaping it, and the power dynamics that define relationships in this critical part of the globe. Let's start with the colonial past. The Pacific's political geography wasn't naturally formed, it was carved out by external powers. British decolonization was largely completed by 1980, but France still maintains New Caledonia and French Polynesia as non-self-governing territories, creating ongoing tensions around self-determination. But decolonization isn't complete. The United States still maintains what I call a modern form of colonialism through the compacts of free association with Micronesia, the Marshall Islands, and Palau. Under these arrangements, the United States provides financial aid and gains strategic military access until the year 2043. It's a clever model. However, these territories are technically independent, but still remain dependent on the United States for support and protection. New Zealand follows a similar path with the Cook Islands and Niue, which govern their own internal affairs while New Zealand handles defense. What's crucial here is that these colonial patterns in governance, in land ownership, and economic dependency are still persistent today. Larger powers often treat smaller island states in a paternal way, embedding them in relationships of aid and control that can be traced back to the colonial era. Now, how is the region being reshaped geopolitically? Over the past 2 decades, the strategic framing shifted from Asia-Pacific to Indo-Pacific. Why does this terminology matter? Because it signals the securitization of maritime space, treating the Indian and Pacific Oceans as a single strategic entity or theater. This gained prominence after 2010, and Beijing sees it very clearly as well. They view the Indo-Pacific narrative as a US-led strategy to contain Chinese influence. This geopolitical competition is institutionalized through alliances. The ANZUS Treaty, signed in 1951, created a trilateral defense pact among Australia, New Zealand, and the United States. It emerged from Cold War anxieties about communist expansion. However, in 1986, New Zealand was effectively suspended after its nuclear-free policy clashed with the interests of the United States. The US simply stopped honoring its defense commitments after this. Fast forward to 2021, and we see the creation of AUKUS, which is a new partnership between Australia, the United Kingdom, and the United States. This pact fundamentally reshapes Australia's role in the region, and it includes a nuclear-powered submarines and advanced technology cooperation in artificial intelligence as well, quantum computing, and hypersonics, which showcases Australia as becoming a full strategic partner of the Western powers. Finally, the Pacific Islands Forum, which was established in 1971, serves as the principal regional political body. It is constantly pulled apart by tensions, however, and by island nations' desires for autonomy, as it conflicts with the strategic interests of global powers that are seeking influence in the region. Which brings us to Australia's specific role and the power dynamics at play. Australia is a major power in the Pacific, but its dominance creates a fundamental imbalance. Australian GDP exceeds the combined economic output of all Pacific Island nations, and you have 26 million Australians versus island populations ranging from 2,000 to 10 million. This economic and demographic disparity translates directly into asymmetric relationships in trade, aid, and diplomacy. In 2018, Australia announced the Pacific Step Up policy, framing it as a commitment to partner with the Pacific family. The rhetoric emphasizes partnership and bonds, but there is a catch. The policy is fundamentally driven by strategic anxiety about Chinese influence, not by Pacific Island priorities. Pacific leaders themselves have noted that increased Australian attention correlates closely with Chinese activities, not organic responses to Pacific needs. The Papua New Guinea case exemplifies this dynamic perfectly well. The PNG achieved independence in 1975, but Australian development assistance still counts for more than two-fifths of its national budget. Australia remains the PNG's largest developmental partner and maintains a substantial influence over economic policy, security arrangements, and institutional development. Australian companies dominate extractive industries, and Australian personnel are embedded in the PNG's governmental structure and institutions. Here's the key insight: formal independence coexists with continued asymmetric dependence and external control. Even the European Union faces challenges in this region, as European strategic concerns center around climate change, which threatens the very existence of low island nations, maritime security, and balancing Chinese influence without destabilizing the region. However, there's a deeper tension. Pacific Island states increasingly seek to exercise agency in shaping their own futures, resisting foreign frameworks that reduce them to pawns in great power competitions.
After exploring the historical and strategic context of Australia and the Pacific, we now turn to Australia's regional structure, beginning with its governance and political stability. Australia became a nation in January 1901. Under its constitution, a federal parliamentary system was established. At its peak is the monarchy, represented by the Governor-General under Section 2 of the Constitution. The Governor-General holds significant powers from appointing ministers to signing bills into law, shared alongside the two houses of Parliament. Those two houses serve distinct roles. The Senate, or the upper house, represents the state equally, while the House of Representatives, or the lower house, represents the people of Australia. To serve in either, you must be an Australian citizen under the Australian Act of 1986, which dual citizenship is prohibited for members, and crucially, no one can sit in both houses simultaneously. For a bill to become law, both houses must approve it before the Governor-General signs off. However, the Senate is specifically restricted from introducing money bills. This entire process is anchored by the rule of law founded in Principle 2 of the Constitution. This ensures that every person, from judges and ministers to everyday citizens, is subject to the same laws, protecting the nation from the exploitation of power. We now shift our focus to Australia's defence industrial capacity. The Australian Defence Force, or the ADF, was originally forged to gain independence from British munitions. This drive for self-resilience sparked a domestic arms industry that continues to define Australia's strategic weight today. This journey began in 1907 with the Lithgow Small Arms Factory, which equipped troops through two world wars. By 1939, Australia had established its own aircraft industry. However, shipbuilding was the true symbol of nationhood. After launching its first dedicated naval vessel in 1911, Australia became a regional repair hub during World War II, serving thousands of Allied ships and providing its vital importance to global partners. Today, Australia is a powerhouse in the global arms trade. According to SIPRI data, Australia was ranked among the top 20 global exporters from 2019 to 2023, trading with partners from North America to the Middle East and Europe. While exports are vast, the US remains the primary source for imports, providing 80% of Australia's high-end military technology. To compensate for its geographic isolation, Australia relies on strategic weight through alliances. First, there was the 1946 ACUSA Agreement, which Australia later joined in 1956, forming the Five Eyes intelligence community, with the core belief that it was important to share information amongst members to protect each other. And then in 1951, ANZUS was created and remains the cornerstone of Australia's strategic arrangement, providing critical access to US intelligence and technology. While the US bond remains firm, Australia is diversifying. New partnerships with India, Japan, and South Korea have emerged, driven by shared concerns regarding China's influence. By strengthening these Indo-Pacific ties, Australia ensures its security is not just reliant on one power, but integrated into a resilient regional network.
Okay, so now moving on to Australia's critical mineral foundation. Australia is no longer just a quarry for the world, it is the bedrock of the global green energy transition. In 2024, the country supplied nearly half of the world's lithium, but the strategy has shifted. It is moving from simple extraction to high value chemical refining. This year, it hit a historic milestone: the first battery grade lithium hydroxide produced at the Kuyana refinery. Backed by a 1.2 billion strategic reserve, Australia is positioning itself as the ethical, low risk alternative to volatile global supply chains. In the race for EV batteries and wind turbines, ethics are now as important as volume, especially for the EU. While the Democratic Republic of Congo dominates cobalt quantity, Australia leads in ESG compliant supply. This cobalt is largely a high standard byproduct of nickel, providing the traceable green minerals that the US and the EU regulations now demand. Similarly, in rare earths, it is the most established non Chinese producer. By integrating the complex cracking and leaching process domestically in Congolese, the country is breaking the 90% refining monopoly held by a single nation, securing the magnets that power the 21st century economy. The economic security relies on diversification. While China remains its largest trading partner, the China Australia relationship is now balanced by record breaking investment from the United States and emerging partnerships with the EU. They are actively moving beyond raw resources into renewable superpower territory, meaning that exporting green hydrogen and aerospace tech. This isn't just about trade, it's also about resilience. By expanding into India and Southeast Asia, they are shielding their economy from the economic coercion and geopolitical tensions also of the past and of the future. Finally, the engine room or the driver of this transition is the energy and transport framework. They have reached a tipping point. Renewables have now officially begun to overtake coal in the grid, but decentralized energy needs a new backbone. So, therefore, we need investment in the renewable energy zones and smart grids to handle the flow. Simultaneously, the physical logistics are being overhauled. Therefore, the Inland Rail project is moving freight off the road and onto tracks, while the cities are becoming global hubs for AI data centers. Australia is building a multimodal digital first infrastructure designed for a net zero future.
Australia's immediate neighborhood includes a diverse group of island states spread across the Pacific Ocean, commonly referred to as the Pacific Island Countries or PICs. The European Union officially recognizes 15 Pacific Island countries. Other organizations, like the World Bank, use narrower or wider definitions. Only four countries out of the PICs, Fiji, Papua New Guinea, the Solomon Islands, and Timor Leste, account for around 90% of both landmass and population, while the remaining states are small, geographically dispersed archipelagos. Despite their limited land area, PICs control vast exclusive economic zones. Collectively, they represent about 20% of the world's EEZs. These offer access to fisheries, minerals, and energy resources which they wouldn't have access to otherwise. For this analysis, we'll focus on the blue economy and the role that it has on the economic challenges and opportunities of PICs, and also on the energy, mining, and tourism sectors. So, looking at the economic profiles of PICs, they rely mainly on agriculture, fishing, and services, particularly tourism. Smaller island states are highly dependent on tourism and foreign income, especially due to emigration, which is very high. While larger countries such as Fiji and Papua New Guinea, which are the biggest economies in the PICS region, have more diversified economies, Fiji has developed manufacturing niches, while Papua New Guinea still remains heavily oriented towards commodity exports. Those include minerals such as gold and copper, but also natural gas. Despite increasing engagement with the Asian economies, PICs remain weakly integrated into global trade. There are high transport costs, small domestic markets, and limited industrial capacity, which constrain diversification and contribute to unemployment and labor migration, particularly to Australia and New Zealand. Now, looking at the role of the blue economy and the PICs, these are a major opportunity for the development of the PICS countries. PICS manage vast ocean spaces and fisheries, especially offshore fishing, and these are a key source of government revenue. Regional mechanisms such as the Vessel Day Scheme, which gives day passes to foreign vessels to go fish in the maritime zones of these countries, has significantly increased income from foreign fishing licenses. Although overfishing and illegal fishing remain serious challenges to fully grasping the potential of the blue economy in these countries. Energy is another structural constraint of PICS countries. Most PICS depend on imported diesel. That is because they historically didn't have access to fossil fuels in their own territories. This makes electricity expensive and makes communities vulnerable to the volatility of global prices. Some countries, notably Fiji and Samoa, have expanded renewable energy sources. Infrastructure and financing, though, continue to limit the progress of renewable energy, especially on smaller states such as Nauru. In these countries, even very small initiatives can have a huge impact because of their small size. So, for example, Nauru is only 21 square kilometers. Now, looking at the mining sector, the region is gaining a lot of strategic importance due to its deep sea mining potential, especially related to critical minerals. But there is a lot of controversy, and there are calls from at least half of the big countries for a pause or moratorium on deep sea mining. Recently, some initiatives have promoted still development of skills and technical capacity for governance and management of deep sea minerals. So, for example, the Deep Sea Minerals Project has aided some countries to develop their own legal frameworks on it, and it was aided and collaborated with the EU. The Cook Island is the largest non polymetric nodule reserve holder within any country's territory, and it can be a huge source of income for the Cook Islands in the future. But also, there are real risks related to economic feasibility and also to environmental risks, which are hardly known as of now. Finally, the tourism sector is the biggest sector among big countries and has allowed these countries to integrate to a certain extent to booming economies due to their proximity and their attractiveness. Palau has and Fiji, for example, have found their own niche sectors of tourism which are related to high-end tourism, but there are real challenges to the further development and sustainability long term of the tourism industry, which are related to extreme global and regional competitiveness, to connectivity and infrastructure, to climate change, to institutional instability that some countries face, and of course to immigration, which makes talent pooling and training and staffing really hard for some industries like the tourism one.
In this section, I'll discuss the structural vulnerabilities of Pacific Island countries, focusing on three main areas: climate exposure and vulnerability, public debt and aid dependency, and weak governance and administrative capacity. These vulnerabilities are closely interconnected and help explain why development challenges in the Pacific remain persistent. I'll start with climate exposure and vulnerability, which is one of the most serious structural challenges facing Pacific Island countries. Pacific Island countries are among the most climate vulnerable states globally. Their geography, particularly low-lying islands and long coastlines, exposes them to frequent typhoons, floods, and rising sea levels. These climate events have major impacts. Flooding can contaminate freshwater aquifers, destroy infrastructure, and ruin farmland, which many communities depend on for food and livelihoods. As a result, basic services such as water access, housing, and food security are often disrupted. In response, various climate adaptation initiatives have been introduced, including regional programs that aim to integrate climate risks into development planning. While these efforts have produced some progress, they are often short-term and project-based. As climate threats continue to intensify, these initiatives remain insufficient on their own. Pacific Island countries also face major constraints when it comes to climate finance. Their small economic bases and weak domestic financial markets mean they rely heavily on external climate funding. Accessing this finance is often complex, and much of it is loan-based, which increases public debt risks. The Pacific Resilience Facility is an important development because it is regionally owned and grant-based, with pledges from European countries and others. However, it cannot substitute long-term economic development, and continued reliance on external finance still risks increasing debt burdens. These climate pressures feed directly into the second vulnerability, public debt and aid dependency. Across the Pacific, debt to GDP ratios are rising. Some countries, including Nauru, the Solomon Islands, and Vanuatu, face particularly high risks of debt distress.
This vulnerability is driven by exposure to climate shocks, economic downturns, and price volatility, combined with narrow economic bases focused on tourism, agriculture, and fisheries. To address this, a key policy shift is needed. Reducing reliance on non concessional loans and ensuring concessional borrowing supports growth and diversification. There has been some good progress through greater use of grants and concessional finance, supported by partners such as Australia, China, New Zealand, Japan, and the United States, and institutions like the World Bank and Asian Development Bank. Despite this, debt accumulation continues to place pressure on public budgets. The third major structural vulnerability is weak governance and administrative capacity. Weak governance often exacerbates public debt problems. Corruption can lead to the misallocation of limited resources and undermines climate adaptation efforts. Countries such as Papua New Guinea, the Solomon Islands, and Vanuatu score relatively low on corruption perception indices, highlighting persistent institutional challenges. Administrative capacity is further constrained by weak enforcement bodies, limited resources, and lack of technical expertise. In addition, poor connectivity across islands leads to high trade and import costs, reducing the affordability of basic goods and limiting effective service delivery. In response to limited financing options, some countries rely heavily on domestic borrowing, such as the Solomon Islands borrowing from local financial institutions. This leads to higher interest rates, crowds out private investment, and ultimately results in slower economic growth, reinforcing long-term constraints. Given these vulnerabilities, I'll now turn to socioeconomic responses, beginning with labor mobility as a form of adaptation, and then considering the role of European engagement. Labor mobility has increasingly emerged as an adaptation strategy for Pacific Island countries. Pacific Island countries face small labor markets, limited job creation, and skills mismatches, which contribute to youth and unemployment and brain drain. As a result, migration becomes both an income strategy and a household-level climate adaptation tool, allowing families to diversify income sources and cope with climate-related risks. Regional schemes such as New Zealand's Recognized Seasonal Employer RSE scheme and Australia's PALM scheme provide temporary employment opportunities. These programs generate remittances, which support household consumption and investment. However, concerns remain regarding worker protection and long-term career prospects. Migration can be effective, but it requires safeguards. Europe can contribute through skills partnerships, training programs, and the promotion of high labor standards, as well as sharing expertise on migration governance and worker protection. Beyond labor mobility, another key area is investment and European partnership potential. Growth prospects in the Pacific remain moderate, constrained by high volatility, corruption, and low regulatory transparency. These constraints result in weak private sector development, low foreign direct investment, and continued aid dependency. Strategic European engagement should thus focus on governance reform, public financial management, and anti-corruption safeguards. By cooperating with Australia and New Zealand and leveraging local expertise, Europe can help move beyond aid dependency and support self-sustaining economic development in the Pacific.
So, based on what we have said, here are recommendations for the EU regarding the future. First, let's talk about energy security. To meet the 65% diversification cap, the EU must bridge the cost gap between Australian production and cheaper non-ESG compliant sources. This requires direct investment in Australian refineries. By guaranteeing minimum prices and subsidizing ethical mining, we ensure that Australian mines remain viable even if global markets crash. We are buying more than minerals, we are buying supply chain integrity. Secondly, our digital infrastructure. Australia is a vital hub for undersea cables under the Global Gateway project. However, massive data centers risk overwhelming the Australian power grid. Our strategy, therefore, is to invest exclusively in energy ready infrastructure, meaning digital hubs powered by dedicated solar or green hydrogen, ensuring that European connectivity doesn't come at the expense of Australian energy stability and disturb its citizens. Finally, we must protect the maritime choke points, like Malacca, Lombok, and Ombai. As Australia shifts to processing battery chemicals, these routes become our green energy lifeline. We propose moving beyond simple military exercises towards regional logistic hubs, which are specialized ports that act as a secure staging ground and ensure that ethical minerals reach European factories without diversion by global rivals. This is a shift from reactive security to proactive resilience.
On this slide, I focus on migration and diaspora engagement and why this matters for both the Pacific and the European Union. First, why it matters. In Pacific Island countries, migration is driven by a combination of climate stress, very small labor markets, and weak social protection systems. Because of this, labor mobility has become a core adaptation strategy at the household level, allowing families to diversify income and manage economic and environmental risks. In terms of current mobility channels, the main pathways are New Zealand's RSE scheme and Australia's PALM scheme. These programs mainly offer seasonal and low or semi skilled employment, and they bring important benefits, particularly through remittances and income diversification. But there are ongoing concerns, especially weak worker protection and limited opportunities for skills progression over time. From a European strategic perspective, migration is both a normative and a strategic policy issue. The EU has an opportunity to develop targeted labor pathways rather than mass migration, especially to help address labor shortages linked to aging populations and the green and digital transitions. This leads to the EU policy recommendations shown here. The EU should focus on developing small, skills linked mobility pathways, co design skills partnerships with Australia and New Zealand, and build on regional training platforms, such as the Australia Pacific Training Coalition. And overall, the goal is to promote rights based, skill strengthening mobility regimes. Moving on to defense, industrial, and security cooperation, the strategic context is one of strong alignment between the EU and Australia, supported by EU leadership and the Prime Minister of Australia. Both sides share a commitment to the rules based global order, which provides the foundation for deeper cooperation. This matters for the EU because the Indo Pacific accounts for around 40% of EU trade, and there is growing concern over China's regional influence. As a result, European and Indo Pacific security are becoming increasingly interconnected. A key development is the Security and Defense Partnership proposed in 2025, which was raised at the G7 summit in June 2025. This partnership focuses on cooperation in areas such as the defense industry, cybersecurity, and counterterrorism. In terms of policy implications, the EU should expand cooperation beyond military exercises, particularly in areas like maritime security, as well as non-proliferation and disarmament. Deepening defense industrial ties can help reinforce EU security arrangements and ultimately secure long-term security and resilience for the European Union.
Now we shift our focus and look at recommendations for European policymakers, starting off with trade and investment diversification. The EU's push for strategic autonomy faces a major hurdle. De-risking from China is expensive due to the high labor and ESG standards in stable partners like Australia. Rather than waiting for a full trade agreement stalled by agriculture, the EU should fast-track a specific critical minerals deal. By removing red tape on battery chemicals and rare earths immediately, we protect European car and defense sectors from global price swings through guaranteed long-term supply contracts. To make this viable, the European Investment Bank should make small equity stakes in Australian processing plants. This reduces risk for private lenders and ensures an ethical supply chain. Simultaneously, we should provide low-cost loans to European firms building renewable energy infrastructure at Australian mine sites. Finally, we must leverage the Global Gateway Fund to modernize Australian ports and rail, lowering transport costs. By implementing a shared digital tracking system, Australian producers can instantly prove they meet the EU's strict battery regulations and carbon border adjustment mechanism. By merging European technology with Australian resources, we create a secure, green, and high-standard alternative to global monopolies. Now, we look over possible security cooperation frameworks. Australia's relationship with the EU reached a milestone in 2022 with the enforcement of a new framework agreement. This isn't just a trade pact. It's a commitment to shared values, from human rights and rule-based order to joint efforts in counterterrorism and non-proliferation. To truly anchor this relationship, European policymakers should now establish a dedicated EU-Australia security and defense pillar. This would align directly with the broader Indo-Pacific strategy, incorporating regular joint threat assessments, expanded maritime cooperation, and a structured dialogue on hybrid and cyber threats. In the digital realm, we must move beyond separate policies. While the EU focuses on the Global Gateway and Australia integrates into the Horizon Europe research program, the goal should be a trilateral digital infrastructure. By prioritizing shared data governance and resilient public infrastructure, we create a secure, high-standard digital ecosystem. Ultimately, we should stop treating security and digital policies as separate silos. By integrating EU-Australian cooperation explicitly into the Indo-Pacific framework, we ensure that diplomacy, defense, and innovation are coordinated to maintain regional stability.
The EU should strengthen strengthen governance and institutional capacity in Pacific Island countries through co-designed reform compacts. These initiatives must reflect local realities by integrating traditional and community-based governance structures alongside formal institutions. By doing so, it is going to enhance democratic participation, accountability, and public trust in Pacific countries' institutions. The long term technical assistance that it goes along with this should prioritize public financial management, anti corruption frameworks, and maritime and fisheries governance, ensuring thus a sustainable use of ocean resources that are vital for long term economic stability. Furthermore, also assistance in developments of connectivity infrastructure and digital public infrastructure can aid social inclusion and accountability, as well as set the Pacific region towards the digital future. These efforts can be funded through the NDICUI and through the Asian Pacific allocations and the specific global challenges allocations. Migration management must also focus on maximizing mutual benefits. The EU should expand thus circular migration labor mobility schemes in sectors facing structural shortages, such as healthcare and agriculture while guaranteeing strong social protection to workers. Reintegration and skills development programs are also of essential nature to ensure the feasibility of circular migration and this type of labor mobility schemes, as they should contribute to sustainable development in countries of origin and also be attractive to workers in the sense that they both in their journey going to the EU and coming back to their countries of origin. At the same time, the EU must also support early planning for climate induced relocation, offering technical and financial assistance to Pacific governments facing long term displacement risks. That way, it can be ahead of the migration flows, migration pushes that are going to take place in the Pacific region. And this also alongside to a bigger scale of integration of knowledge and of educational initiatives should be carried out. It could be carried out also through Erasmus Plus programs and Horizon Europe program. And finally, reducing exposure to global shocks requires a greater economic and infrastructure resilience out of the Pacific region, and it's through the Global Gateway strategy that the EU should support energy diversification, renewable transition, digital connectivity, and transport infrastructure that will allow this higher level of resilience. Cooperation with trusted partners, particularly Australia and New Zealand, can multiply impact without creating dependency and can allow the EU to act more effectively in the region without overstretching its capabilities. In conclusion, a stable, resilient Pacific directly supports European security, migration governance, and supply chain stability. It supports the strategic interests of the EU in a growing, unstable, and multipolar world. Principal yet strategic EU engagement is thus not optional, is essential. And Australia and New Zealand are key partners in carrying out this strategy, which focuses on building most of all resilience, both institutional, economic, and environmental, so the values and the strategic pragmatic interests of the EU can also be expanded to the Pacific and have a higher level of cooperation in the region. Thank you so much for your attention.